As the silence that has governed everyone's lives begins to thin, it becomes increasingly clear that what follows will not arrive as a single event. The reckoning will not announce itself with spectacle. It will unfold through consequence, quiet, cumulative, and irreversible. The world the characters inhabit has already shifted. What remains is the task of living inside the shape of that shift. For Yates, the realization settles with a sobering clarity. Control is no longer about command. It is about containment. He understands now that the structures surrounding them, family, company, reputation, alliances, have all been altered by exposure. Some damage cannot be undone. It can only be managed. This understanding changes how he moves, how he speaks, and how he plans. He begins to act with an intentional slowness that unsettles those around him. The old Yates would have confronted, demanded, asserted. The man he is becoming does something more dangerous. He waits with purpose. He observes how fear redirects loyalty, how silence invites speculation, how small gestures reveal deeper alignments. He allows people to reveal themselves. This is not mercy. It is strategy refined by restraint. Merkin senses this evolution intimately. She recognizes the tension between readiness and resolve in Yates, and she understands the cost of it. She knows that restraint requires endurance, that choosing not to strike is often more exhausting than action. She does not ask him to promise safety. She asks him to promise honesty. And in this, their partnership deepens further, not through grand declarations, but through shared responsibility. Merkin herself changes in ways that surprise even her. She no longer measures her choices by proximity to family approval or fear of consequence. Instead, she measures them by coherence, whether her actions align with the moral clarity she has claimed. This does not make decisions easier. It makes them heavier, but it also makes them hers. Her relationship to fear transforms. Fear no longer dictates silence. It informs caution. She learns the difference, and that difference becomes a source of strength. When she speaks now, she does so deliberately, aware that words carry risk, but also knowing that silence carries its own dangers. Around them, the household adjusts. Conversations become shorter, more deliberate. People learn which topics invite tension and which preserve the fragile equilibrium. The mansion does not erupt into chaos, it contracts. Rooms feel smaller, doors feel heavier. Everyone senses that the margin for error has narrowed. Haydar feels this contraction acutely. What he once interpreted as temporary resistance begins to resemble permanence. Merkin does not return. She does not soften. She does not negotiate her boundaries. For Haydar, this is more destabilizing than open defiance. Silence from a daughter who once mirrored his authority feels like erasure. He responds by tightening his grip where he still can. He speaks more forcefully in familiar spaces, reasserts expectations, revisits old loyalties. Yet these efforts reveal a truth he struggles to accept. Authority reclaimed through force does not resemble authority once granted through trust. His certainty fractures into irritation, then into resentment. Privately, Haydar begins to rewrite the narrative of his own actions, not to justify them to others, but to himself. He frames Merkin's choices as betrayal rather than conscience. He reframes the kidnapping as necessity rather than excess. Each reframing offers temporary relief, but deepens the distance between reality and belief. This internal dissonance becomes his quiet punishment. Muzayyan's reckoning unfolds differently. Stripped of certainty by the confrontation with Yates, she retreats into introspection she has never practiced. The knife, once a symbol of protection in her mind, becomes a haunting reminder of how close she came to crossing a line she can no longer defend. She does not apologize, not because she feels no regret, but because regret destabilizes the identity she relied upon for survival. She struggles with the realization that love, when filtered through fear, can become indistinguishable from harm. This realization does not resolve her pain, it exposes it. Nazir remains, as ever, at a distance. His power grows not through action, but through patience. He understands that exposure does not always require revelation. Sometimes it requires time. He watches how pressure reshapes behavior, how people adjust their ethics to preserve comfort, how fear creates dependencies. He allows events to unfold without interference, confident that momentum favors him. Eitz recognizes this threat clearly. He understands that Nazir's influence is not a problem that can be confronted directly. It must be displaced. This requires a different kind of courage, one rooted in consistency rather than dominance. He begins to position himself not as an opposing force, but as an alternative center of gravity. This is slow work. It demands trust from those who have learned to survive through caution. It demands credibility earned through restraint. Eitz commits to it regardless, aware that anything faster would collapse under scrutiny. Merkin supports this shift quietly. She becomes a stabilizing presence not by intervening, but by refusing to allow moral shortcuts. When fear suggests compromise, she asks what that compromise would cost later. When silence tempts avoidance, she asks who benefits from it. Her questions do not accuse, they clarify. This partnership changes the dynamic between them fundamentally. They are no longer united solely by survival. They are united by intention. As the days pass, the sense of inevitability intensifies. It becomes clear that the old structures cannot hold indefinitely. Too many truths have surfaced. Too many loyalties have shifted. The silence that once concealed fractures now highlights them. The reckoning does not arrive as confrontation. It arrives as consequence. Decisions made earlier begin to reverberate. Trust withheld alters alliances. Silence maintained invites speculation. Control exerted without legitimacy invites resistance. Each character begins to feel the weight of choices they can no longer undo. Merkin understands this most clearly. She recognizes that justice, in their world, will not look like resolution. It will look like alignment, living with the consequences of integrity even when those consequences are painful. She does not expect vindication. She expects cost, and she accepts it. By the time the narrative reaches this point, the question is no longer who is right. It is who is willing to live with themselves afterward. Eitz chooses restraint over domination. Merkin chooses conscience over comfort. Haydar chooses control over reconciliation. Muzayan chooses denial over transformation. Nazir chooses patience over exposure. These choices do not conclude the story, they define it. The future remains uncertain, shaped by forces still in motion. Threats persist, alliances remain unstable. But something fundamental has shifted. The illusion that violence preserves order has been dismantled. What remains is fragile, contested, and honest. And as the story prepares to move beyond this chapter, it does so not toward peace, but toward accountability, the kind that arrives slowly, unevenly, and without guarantees. In this world, survival is no longer enough. What matters now is what kind of survival people are willing to claim and what they are willing to sacrifice to claim it.